This is really for grid scale battery energy storage. So I do agree that tier one was never the intention of, at least the past board that we had here, to be incorporated. It was simply added into the bylaw wording for clarification purposes, meaning this is what tier one represents, and then anything that is not tier one, which is really tier two and tier three, here are the definitions, and moreover, that the permitting requirements really were putting fences around tier two and tier three battery energy storage systems.
What are the
Yeah,
thoughts from?
I agree, yeah.
Although Peter, you're not voting on this, we value your opinion.
No, I agree, that's what I recall as well.
Okay. So yeah, so I propose that in our working copy, we accept those revisions that are proposed in the MK Notes version, which is the title changes to grid scale battery energy storage system. And that the changes to 2.1 that strike out all of the language after excluding general maintenance and repair be accepted. The language specifically addressing the different types of battery technologies. And then that will make it so that there are tiers 1, 2, and 3. And then, if I remember correctly, and I believe this is what we have intended to set last year, is that, tier 1 battery energy storage systems are allowed by right in all zoning districts, subject to applicable provisions of the state building code, electrical code, fire code, and other codes into section 4. So, if that makes sense to everybody, which it sounds like it does, our working version accepts that. Yep.
Robert Fagundes, 148 New Westminster Road. I was at the annual town meeting last year, and we voted against this due to being, basically on my part, ignorant maybe of the fact that, is it just because if there's no regulation at all, like if we don't have one of these bylaws, then anybody can come in and install one of these things, and there's more issues, right? We're taking a step forward in the right direction to regulate it before somebody moves in, and then there is an issue because it's unregulated or anything, right? Is that correct?
Yeah, so there's actually a little bit of a unique situation that's happened here. So Hubbardston in its zoning bylaws has a all other uses prohibited clause. So when battery energy storage was not mentioned at all, it was specifically prohibited by rule, because if it's not a listed use, it's prohibited.
Okay.
And that's not necessarily compliant with state law on how things have developed, but that was also 4 years ago when we started trying to fix this. So, so what happened when this ended up going to the Attorney General's office the first time, because there was a previous existing version of this, the Attorney General's office came back, struck out the battery energy storage bylaw, but then blue penciled our Article 4 in a way that made it so that any type of battery energy storage system, regardless of size, is allowed by right on any lot in Hubbardston.
Okay.
So under how the rules currently are, by right, somebody could go into Pinecrest and.
So that's a right, not like a privilege, so they have a right to do this right now, so
Yeah,
unless we put this
allowed by right.
Okay, so
Which-
unless we put this regulation in place at some form or another, whether we limit at 0.5 megawatt or 1 megawatt to get all these other provisions in there.
Article 4, is it?
We need, basically, we
believe it
need
is.
to do this so that somebody doesn't put in a giant electrical bank in
Yeah.
any neighborhood, right?
Well, and
So-
we want people to be able to put in giant electrical banks. We just
We
don't
as
want
in
it to
everybody,
be-
because I do not, I wouldn't say we.
Fair
Yeah,
enough.
yeah.
But yeah, we don't, the goal isn't to close things off, but the issue that comes up in the current moment is that because of the way it was blue penciled, there's no reasonable restriction.
Okay,
So the issue that we have right now is that, and again, it's very reasonable that if you have solar panels, say for example, on top of your roof, you might also have battery energy storage.
Right.
To take advantage of that electrodes that you store during the day and utilize it at night. The grid scale battery energy storage systems are a totally different beast altogether. Now, we already have them here in town. A lot of people don't know that, but for example, on Williamsville Road, we have a set of solar arrays that are commercial
Mhm.
solar arrays. These are not individuals who have them on their rooftops, for which they already allowed the installation of a battery energy storage system so that they can they can store that energy during the day when the prices of electricity are fairly low, and then release it at prime time, which is typically 5, 6, 7 o'clock at night, depending on obviously the time of the season of the year. And that's truly a commercial grid scale where they don't have any utility of those electrons that are basically collected during the day for illumination or anything of that nature, but basically all they're doing is they're providing the grid, the utility, with that energy. And the energy that they're storing in those batteries is again just to supply the grid so that you, myself, and anybody on this room, including the town itself, be able to get that energy, hopefully during the times when energy might be a bit more expensive. And by so doing, it basically flattens the curve and makes it a little bit better for everybody to be able to utilize renewable energy. So again, the intention of all of this here, even what we did 4 years ago, and I was pretty much involved with this here with Alice and other people, was to create a bylaw that put some parameters around this here so that we know where we can install these grid scale battery energy storage systems. And again, that it's not just installed anywhere here in town, and that it be done in a place where you have the appropriate infrastructure to be able to support this here. And again, one of the biggest issues that we all need to consider here is that typically grid scale battery energy storage systems require to have 3-phase electricity power available on the street. And there's only certain areas in our town where that exists, and then there's a considerable consideration as to whether or not we can do it anywhere where 3-phase electricity is. Or should we restrict it, say, for example, in our commercial zone, which is really what part of the idea here was, is we have potentially places where we could place this here in a commercial zone area, which might be therefore more suitable for the construction of these grid scale battery energy storage systems.
Okay.
Well, that's a little history.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah, no,
That
this
was
it's,
helpful, thank you.
yeah, it's been something we've been wrestling with for half a decade.
Yeah.
Yeah, and we were actually one of the first communities to try to put anything forward on this. So we were one of the first communities to get shot down on it. And ironically, the bylaw that we put forward, even though it didn't work out, ended up being the template for like 15 other towns that came after us.
Yeah.
Carver being one of them, and Carver's version got through.
And now we're stealing it back.
Yeah. Yeah, pretty much. And I don't know if you were able to find in Article 4, but what had happened is we made a change in Article 4 in order to make it so that it was consistent with what we were trying to do with the BEST bylaw. So it said battery energy storage systems allowed subject to the requirements of either Article 23 or Article 24. And what happened when all of these went through the Attorney General's office, she struck out the subject to the restrictions of Article 23 or 24, but left battery energy storage
System in
systems
there.
under the allowed by right in all zones.
Yeah.
I would argue that it's completely different from solar itself because there's no battery bank on an average solar panel. So I don't believe that would be restricted or covered under that won't restrict where you put solar panels thing. And being a battery energy storage, it's like having a mini power plant that's completely unmanned. So when that thing does torch off, nobody's there to see it happen except for an automated fire alarm that's gonna go off, right? So I don't believe that it should be covered under the same
The state.
whatever
State does have a
statute,
different
code, whatever you
interpretation
wanna
of
call
that.
it, chapter and section, it doesn't appear to be the same in my understanding of it.
Yeah, and I believe that's also the majority opinion of the board,
Okay.
but it's also not the legal environment we're operating in because of the state.
Okay.
Yeah.
So that's what has put us in the place where we definitely need to do something. And that we can kind of adjust it
Yeah.
and correct it as necessary, but
Can
getting
we,
to
can we
something.
write in there that it has to be manned 24 hours a day?
No.
No way you're
They'll
gonna
get
get
sent
that
right back
I
by
just-
the
I had
Attorney
to say it.
General's office.
I love the 2 jobs for your economy, but.
Yeah.
What, and we'll get to it, and we need to keep moving on this so that we
I just
we
wanna
stay
point
within
one more
the
thing,
timeline.
Mr. Chair, and this is, I think, really important. Section 2.1, we did strike out, some very specific examples, which again, I probably should never have gone in last year as best subject to this bylaw, are only those that exceed the following capacities. We put lead acid, nickel, lithium ion and so forth, and then we put some kilowatt hours. Again, the technology is really changing quite a bit. And more importantly, we're getting into a point where some of these technologies really will not make any sense in the future, and actually don't even include technologies that exist right now. A very good example is Form Energy, that basically what they're using is they're using iron, which is a very, very new technology, well, relatively new technology that has been, that is basically taking over the industry. And all they're doing is they're converting energy into rust or into batteries.
Right.
And then letting it rust, letting the rust formation create electricity.
Yeah.
And talk about something that is about as innocuous as possible, and it has no explosive factors or anything like that.
Right.
And they're taking over this whole industry left and right.
So if we rewrote that so that it stated any and all type of electrical storage, because, like Pine Tree Power in Westminster, Fitchburg, is wood burning, they can't store energy there. So if we rewrote that, so it didn't have the type of battery, but if it stated just the ability to store energy, because I don't think any other
So
fuel
yeah,
out there
yeah, the
is
generic-
stored, I mean, you burn diesel fuel, for a generator or whatever, but it's not technically stored energy.
Yeah, it's not storing energy. It's,
Right.
it's
And-
truly not a battery.
And
Yeah.
just interject also so we can stay on schedule here. Is we did make that change.
Okay.
So the change that we just talked about was striking all of that language.
Okay.
All the way down to where you get to a battery energy storage system that is subject to the bylaw. So the only place where regulation on it starts is now if somebody is over 0.5 megawatt.
Yep.
Which is what
500
we
kilowatt.
all intended, and
Which is a
somehow
tier 2.
in the versioning of the last
we
time
talked
this
about
went
in the
forward,
beginning.
got screwed up.
Yeah, which is tier 2.
Yeah,
Or over.
yeah. So,
If we're gonna step through this, can I suggest that you call for other first-time comments first? See if there are any other overarching issues that we need to be thinking about?
yeah, I suppose that was just the first major threshold issue. Are there any other overarching comments through the document? Because there's gonna be some additional changes that we need to make, because of the change we just made to 2.1. So from my perspective, as long as we do those changes consistent with it.
Point of clarification, Mr. Chair.
Yep.
I'm not sure what you meant by overarching. I understood Mark to be asking about accepting comments section by section as they were brought up, rather than going through all of his comments and then starting over with somebody else's comments on the same section.
That's the point I was trying to
Oh,
make.
Yeah, I mean, I suppose that would be the case. We've gone through the board. I guess, do you have any comments on any of those sections so far?
We're looking at sections 1 through 4.
Yeah, sections 1 through 4.
Okay, yeah, Tim Hawley, 35 Mount Jefferson Road.
Oh, and just to recognize for the record, Tim also is one of the volunteers that worked with Alec on this, so we're not just picking random people out of the world and inviting them up to the table.
My comments on section 2 are very much in line with what Mark had recommended. In my comments, I said tier 1 should be defined as greater than 0.2 megawatt hours and less than 0.5. I'm not sure why we wanna have anything like a wristwatch or a laptop battery included in tier one. But that's the only thing that, where my comments on section 2 are any different than Mark's. And I just wanna reiterate that even if it's not covered by any of the bylaws, any battery storage system will still be regulated by the building, electrical, and fire codes.
And Tim, can you just restate for me, what was the threshold you think that tier 2 should begin at? Or the regulation should begin at?
Well, I had said 0.5 megawatt hours, but whether it's 0.5 or 1, you know, as with the battery technology changing a lot, I think either one of those is in the ballpark.
I mean, since we're exempting everything that's under half a megawatt, it seems like it would make sense to just have everything under half exempted, even if it pulls in smaller units by definition, because we're using that definition to exempt them. Doesn't seem like we need to make a carve out, but just set a bottom end.
We're not making any requirements that would be applicable.
Okay.
Okay, that's all I have on the
Okay.
first
How about
four
that,
sections.
hang around for, I'm sure we'll get back to
You
it.
want-
So,
I'm good back here.
so on section 3, there's a comment that was presented about moving 3.3 to section 5. That ended up in that space because, the fire department wanted it featured in the way that was maximally prominent. And it's just, it's a formatting critique, so I say we just leave it as it is.
Well, the problem is that these are general requirements, that would be,
Oh,
that
so
would
it
be
would-
read
it
as
would pull
applicable
that
to all
over
3
to-
tiers.
Okay, from that perspective, it makes sense to move it to 5 then.
Yeah, 5 is specifically for tier 2 and 3.
Yeah, that's correct, that should get moved to, that should get moved to 5.
Where in section 5, does anyone have a proposed area? Or just generically under 5?
Put it at the top if you want it to be prominent.
I mean,
You put it at the end.
yeah, at this point, just
Yeah,
under
fair enough.
5. Just to make it not require shifting everything.
Yeah, I mean, you're gonna make it 516 now?
Yeah. So then that moves us to 4, which is the exemption that carves out number 1, which is tier 1 battery energy storage systems are allowed by right in all districts, which are the ones that are under half a megawatt, which are the ones specifically.
As
where
defined
we're-
in section 2.
Yeah, and that we're picking that threshold because that's where we expect cars and home systems to be in the reasonable near future.
And I think the industry defines them as such.
Yeah. All right, so for tier, that's moving us into 5, so we have permitting requirements for tier 2 and tier 3 systems. So this raises a good question for Alec, because of the blue penciling that had happened in Article 4, and there will be a conflict between Article 4 and what goes on here. What's the
Yeah,
best way to address that?
You know, I'm not sure, based on what you've just been talking about, whether there actually is something in Article 4 right now on BES or there is not. The copy that I had that I thought was the current zoning bylaws does not have references to BES in it, which is why I put this comment in here.
I did do a track change earlier of BES, and
So,
it only shows up here, but let's try it under battery. No, nothing in 4 under BES, battery, storage system.
so it's not, just go to where you just were,
Where I just was.
or rather, where,
Do you wanna go to Article 4?
yeah, Article 4 where uses are.
Gotta get your use table.
So, the version that we need is the last version that Mark put together when he was still the land use clerk, because that's the version that had it.
Is that the 2022?
After it came
Although
back from the
I thought
agent.
that was the current version that's online.
I thought this was the current version,
You want me to get
but,
you Sure.
but you guys seem emphatic that there was, that somehow the AG put something regarding BES in there.
Yeah, so here it says solar,
This was, the current online was amended through June 7th of 2022.
Exactly. And that's, I mean, that's the one that is online.
yeah, so it was in this P. We just found another
The
error.
Attorney General, you want it in December, after December 2022? That was the last.
I don't think they actually delivered their opinion until 23,
Well,
fall
yeah,
of 23
yeah,
or something.
yeah, so the blue line that
So,
Christopher's talking about.
so
was
that,
the
that's a
2023
mistake in the
version.
version that's online, because in the memo from the Attorney General's office, she very clearly had blue penciled Article 4. So that's an error in what's posted on the website.
So,
I'm 100% confident that there's a mistake on what's posted.
so, Mr. Chair, I think we really need to take a look at what the bylaw, the zoning bylaw that we have right now online is. Main reason I'm saying that is because even at this point in time, Article 23 is still in there. And it still references this grid scale battery energy storage system, so I think we really.
It's not, there's no text there, it's just a section.
Yeah.
It just
Why?
says,
We should
it just says omitted.
We should totally take it out, right?
It's just one page that
The-
says omitted.
The way,
Yeah, it just says
administratively, the
yeah.
way it's in there is correct, because you do have an Article 24, and so you need to leave the placeholder for an article.
But is there anything else with regards to battery? Because I don't see any reference to battery here.
No, that does not exist otherwise in your bylaw.
Okay, so, do the blue line sections, or the blue line version, I don't believe that it was ever shared with any at least with the general members of the planning board, that I'm aware of, because I don't remember seeing it.
I'm looking at an email right now where it went to, where all,
Click the +5 others, yeah.
it went to all of the members of the planning board
Okay.
and the land use clerk at the time.
All right, since we have switched our email systems and so forth, I'm not quite sure that we have
Yeah.
all of these things on record.
So-
Well, you should probably stick a pin in
But,
that one
but
and just
anyway,
move on. But
we should definitely make sure that we have the blue line version
Yeah, so
correctly
here,
setting it.
here's the language, and it's what I'd referenced earlier.
Yeah.
Where it was, amending section 4.5, uses permitted by special permit in commercial districts, to add the new subsection regarding battery energy storage systems as follows, with emphasis added. Grid scale battery energy storage systems subject to Article 43. As discussed above in more detail, we disapprove the reference to Article 23 shown in above and underlined, because in a decision, case 10063, blah, 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 we disapproved Article 23 because it conflicts with 40A. For that reason, we disapproved the reference to Article 43, and the town should consult with town council with any questions. So that was the memo from the Attorney General's office.
So an interim action is that I can just crack these open,
Yeah,
break open the Word copy. If the Attorney General has ordered the board at the town to include something in the bylaw, then short of a recodification that otherwise wiped it out, at any time, we can go back in and correct it to the way the Attorney General has said it needs to be. Between now and your next meeting, we can do that, and that'll allow us to consider other sections as well. So ultimately, I will be recommending the board continue this public hearing, but I also recommend that tonight, you continue working your way through Article 23, so we can get that submitted to town meeting floor.
so I'm now resending that to everybody, including Alec and Leanne.
Thank you.
And adding our volunteers. And would anybody else like a copy of the memo from the Attorney General's office?
Sure.
You wanna give Leanne your email address so you're not shouting it out over there?
Yeah, I don't want everybody who's watching this to email me, so sign me up for some email.
Yeah, and-
I mean, you can, but those are my notes.
We posted
Yeah, and can you forward that over to him from your email? Awesome.
What was the date that it was originally sent out again?
Oh, it's slow, can you read that?
Yes.
It
Okay,
was.
thank you.
Yep.
12/20/23.
Yeah, so
At
that's
5:45
that's a
PM.
year after this version
Yeah.
of the bylaws that's currently posted.
So what happened there? There was, the new version of the bylaws was,
Your current online version.
we did it together. And I thought it got posted. I wonder how,
It may
maybe
be
when the website
worthwhile.
updated, it got reverted?
It may also just be worthwhile to pull whatever copy is on file in written format with the town clerk, because that
Yeah.
is the official copy. And so if she has the most up-to-date, then it's just a matter of the wrong PDF is posted. If she does not have it on file, then we never made the correction.
Yeah, cause I'm not losing my mind. You spent 6 months of your life going through all of these minutes, trying to get all of this stuff right.
That was the 2022 version
Yeah,
that I worked on. I think I was probably gone.
And
I don't think
Candace and I made sure that got in, so Melody does have the version that Mark had worked on about a year and a half ago.
okay, and then the following, we'll have to sort that out. So, all right.
I don't think I'm.
At a certain point.
I'm pretty,
Mr.
I
Chair,
didn't work here
remember we kind of
in
got
December of
pushing
23.
because
Yeah,
we-
fair enough.
that's the,
Is the bottom line. The last version that I saw was before you received
Yeah.
this guidance from the AG.
Okay, well, we got that figured out.
oh shoot, you can't blame you.
I'm making
All
sure
right,
of that.
so the recommendation from the planner is, and there actually isn't a lot more redlining in this, so despite the fact it's pretty long, where we're probably actually not that far away. So we talked about moving 3 to 5 in the version that's currently on the table for discussion. And for the benefit of the public, 3.3 is the, is all access roads to a BES should be at least 18 feet wide, constructed of an all-weather surface and cleared of obstructions on both sides by at least 2 feet. A 16-inch vertical clearance should be maintained for large vehicle access. Access gates erected on site should be at least 12 feet wide, accessible via the Hubbardston Fire Department lock. Access to all 4 sides of each enclosure should be provided where practical. And that was specifically requested by the fire department the first time we looked at it.
And in my running draft, that is now 516.
Okay, so, moving forward into 4, so we're striking the last sentence there in order to be consistent with what we're doing. Because Tier 1 battery energy storage systems are allowed by right in all zoning districts based upon the last 25 minutes of conversation we had. So, moving into permitting requirements for Tier 2 and Tier 3 systems. We just talked about the Article 4 issue. Alex gonna look into that and find out what's going on with the versioning, and that explains why there's been the miscommunication on it. So we're striking out that these requirements apply to Tier 1 based upon our previous conversation. And we're striking out, except where it is specifically noted to apply to only Tier 2 and Tier 3, because the restrictions only apply to Tier 2 and Tier 3. So that's starting us into 5. Any comments from anybody on that? Yep, go ahead.
Comment on section 5.9, are we up to that?
We're not quite there yet. So signage, the recommendation on the version on the table is that signage shall comply with the requirements of Article 17 of the zoning bylaws and applicable provisions in the state building code, electrical code, fire code, and other codes, because they have some requirements there. The argument that's been raised on 5.2.1 and 5.2.2, that they're probably not necessary because we've already said that they have to follow those codes. We don't really need to call those codes out by number, and by doing so, we're creating a risk that this could become out of date if those codes change their numbering. So,
Yeah,
unless,
strike it.
Yeah, unless anybody on the board objects, I think it's pretty simple to just strike those.
You had essentially the same comment from Carolyn Murray a year
Yeah.
ago as well.
So in the version on the table, we're striking 521 and 522 in preference of just saying that you need to follow the state building code, electrical code, and fire code in 5.2 above. In 5.5, from the previously submitted versions, we're deleting tier 1. And we had a comment for 5.9.
Yeah, Tim Holly, 35 Mount Jefferson Road, just 'cause it's a bunch of words, I printed out copies of my comments, there's a paragraph here on. Would you like one?
Thank you, sir.
So 5.9, 5.9, I recommend that mitigation for loss of carbon sequestration with one modification be applied to all land use changes governed by the planning board. I guess that's probably a topic for another.
In case you want something else to do tonight.
Yeah, no, I think that's past the scope of where we're at on this.
The one modification I recommend, which would apply to our discussion tonight, is instead of a prohibition, to require, under the guidance of a professional forester, that the forest be maintained in a healthy condition through tree cutting and other practices that the forester may advise, so far as is possible in the face of insects, diseases, and abiotic disturbances.
Including.
So on line.
It's on line 155. I mean, so what that would do from a functional standpoint is that would allow when designated by a professional forester, essentially logging. or
It
timber
could be
harvesting.
logging, it could be other activities that enable the forest to better withstand the impacts of insects, diseases, and wind or ice.
I mean, so that's actually consistent with what DCR's position tends to be, as evidenced by all the cutting plans that are currently going on in town. What's the board's sentiment on that? It changes it from all timber cutting being prohibited to managed timber cutting under the guidance of a professional forester being allowed. And like what the practical example of that is the watershed off of Noller Road is going through and they're selectively harvesting trees in order to encourage, I believe they're doing it to encourage pines to grow. Or is it oaks? It's one of the ways. They cut down one of them to encourage a more native tree species to grow. So that type of work would be allowed under the language that's being suggested here.
So I'm trying to understand here I mean, I'm just trying to take a look at, for example, in our commercial zone areas, we may have pieces of property that have mix of some forest. What we call forest is just, there's trees there. The question is what makes a forest versus not a forest that would be subject to this here, right? So if somebody is trying to make sure that they have cleared land so that they can put a battery energy storage system on this piece of land, are we putting encumbrances here? And I understand why we ought to, because, for the the loss of carbon sequestration, and we've had this issue in the past where we took land and cut the trees and then put solar panels on it, which is kind of putting things.
Killing the forest.
Well, exactly. So my question here is what I'm trying to understand here is what designates a forest to be a forest here? Does it have to be something that has been designated by our forester to be a forest? I mean, again, I'm trying to understand.
It's a capitalized term, which suggests that it's a defined term.
Well,
Maybe it was defined in Carver's.
So, part of why that has been in what's turned into the model bylaw is because in communities that are more eastern to us, where forest land is a more scarce resource, there's a lot of concern about,
understood.
losing the last bit of it just to putting battery energy storage and solar.
Correct.
So,
And even here, it may not make sense to cut down trees just again to put solar panels in. But again, what I'm trying to understand here, if you have a 5-acre lot, let's say for example, you have 1 acre where you have some trees, and you're going to now cut some of those trees so that you can make sure that you can put a battery energy storage system, does that automatically mean that you cannot do that?
I think it's a legitimate question on whether or not that's a reasonable restriction.
Well, what this is actually saying is that if you're gonna cut trees, you've gotta have another area 2 times as big that you're not gonna cut trees.
Within that same lot?
That's what 5.9 says.
So within that
Whether
same.
it's a good idea or not is another matter.
Yeah, I think we need to clarify, there, earlier in section 5, there's discussion of removing trees, having enough clear space around the batteries
Right.
for fire protection
Correct.
and
Yeah.
equipment operation.
Which is why I'm
This-
bringing this up also.
Well, this section 5.9 has nothing to do with clearing the trees around the batteries. That's a given. We need to do that for fire safety and other reasons, but this 5.9 is about the compensating land that will be maintained as forest. And I think in terms of the difference between a forest and a non-forest, a forest, it has trees, it also has what we call understory vegetation. There's shrubs and small trees that are less than 20 feet tall. It has a litter layer of decaying leaves and branches, maybe fallen trees that are slowly decomposing and adding to the soil. And it has a whole complex of insects and microorganisms in the soil of that property that make it a forest. There's also bird species that are likely to be there depending on what kind of trees there are and how big the area is. And all of those things that I just described do not apply to trees scattered across a lawn. That's, if you think of trees spaced out on a lawn somewhere with grass that's kept mowed underneath and the leaves are raked off in the fall, that's not a forest.
Could we say that any undeveloped property is technically forest until it's developed, right? Like if,
Well,
in
if
theory,
you-
right? If nobody's ever dug a hole
Unless it's
there.
cleared for pasture or.
Right, which is
agriculture.
technically undeveloped, there's no building on the pasture unless the barn
Right,
off the
so
side,
you-
right?
so you have-
So any undeveloped property would technically be a forest, anywhere in town.
Well,
is-
not if it's a pasture.
Right,
Yeah, so
Correct.
I think there's an issue that we gotta look at here first before we get into that. And I believe that the equal to 2 times, land on the same lot and equal to 2 times the total area of forest land that will be eliminated. I think that's gonna draw an objection from the Attorney General's office.
Yeah.
Cause if you think about doing a 5-acre lot
Wouldn't surprise me.
and you have to have.
Although it did sneak through on Carver, but that doesn't mean they wouldn't
Well,
reconsider.
but it also drew a problem on, there was a bylaw that we presented where it drew a problem where, they actually wrote out a suggested map and were like, okay, well, if you have a 3-acre property and you're specifying this percentage to go to this, like, unless the property is round, it doesn't work with your setbacks. Like, it actually ends up prohibiting it.
Yeah.
And it's the same kind of
I remember
situation
something like that, yeah.
where, so,
If the board would be interested in requiring that the remaining land be kept under the guidance of a professional forester to achieve the goals put forward by Mr. Hawley, I can, between now and then, take a stab at what I would say would probably be 5.91 and striking some of 5.9.
yeah, we need
That
to,
sounds good.
I think we need to delete out the 2 times to have this make it through the Attorney General's office, unless anybody on the board objects to that. Because that's gonna be an unreasonable restriction. Because it's hard to go, so ultimately, when they go to approve these, they come back and they listen to these meetings, if it's a close issue, to try to find out what our rational basis was for the restriction that we were doing. And I don't think there is a great rational basis for doing 2 times. For doing equal to, and say that 50% of the property needs to remain forested, that doesn't seem unreasonable. Especially given the fact that the average undeveloped lot in this town is greater than 5 acres. And that's an issue that came up in the previous review, where when they started looking at average lot sizes for other communities, they weren't looking at us, where undeveloped lots in this town tend to be 5 acres or bigger, or tiny and completely undevelopable. There isn't like a surplus of 2-acre lots kicking around. So, I guess to follow the suggestion that came from the planner there is we would strike the 2 times, and we would adopt the modified language on the forester, subject to further cleanup by our planner. Okay.
Yeah, if you're interested in going to that model of, encouraging managed forestry rather than no touch, it's a stock paragraph that the state applies to all conservation restrictions when land is being protected in perpetuity. They do allow managed forestry for XYZ reasons, and I can send you that. It's a boilerplate thing.
Yeah, I think it makes a lot of sense, given the fact that there's been a lot of expressed concern about managing fire damage. And you do that a lot better with a managed forest than a,
Yeah.
don't ever touch the scrub brush around this thing that might catch fire.
Yeah.
All right, so we're moving forward into 510, which was a clause that I added, which apparently will clear the Attorney General's office.
Yeah, that was a little, you had a comment from Carolyn on that one as well, that.
It's cleared them twice with other towns.
Has it? Okay.
Yeah. So then,
Yeah.
other than that, there's no additional comments running through that whole section. I guess we'll just take it all together. Any comments running through up to 6.4 from anybody? All right, so we're on 6.4 where there's comments, and the comment is similar to the same thing that happened in the previous section, where we're calling out specific sections in the fire code, and we really shouldn't do that. We should just state that you have to follow the fire code.
Makes sense.
That and the planning board doesn't need to review on a regular basis fire test data.
We don't need 6.5 either. It comes under the fire department. MSDO sheets.
But that was left there because they just have to submit it in the application the first time.
Okay.
So does anybody have a problem with just striking 6.4? Since it's pretty well addressed otherwhere elsewhere in the document.
Makes sense.
Alright, so I don't think we have any more controversy until we get to 6-9. Which is the same thing, we're specifically referencing things that could change. Those are already things that are required by being in compliance with the electrical code. So I would suggest that we strike that. And included in the recommendation of the striking here is obviously reorganizing the numbers, just to make sure that that's clear on the record.
Let's hope so.
I love it.
Alright, so we don't run into controversy again until we get to 11. And this has been something that's come up in multiple places, because historically we've had difficulty enforcing annual reports, specifically with the solars. And that's because the solar installations, as soon as they're built, they're sold off to asset-backed trusts. And the only way we're able to get a hold of them is if we slip a note in their tax bill. So it's been a real problem with enforcement and compliance to try to get these annual reports. And there's certainly a valid question as to whether or not they're really necessary, and whether or not they're appropriate to have be due to the planning board. Because ultimately, if we were requiring these kinds of reports, they should be due to the building commissioner, or they should be due to the fire department. So, I guess the question for the board is whether or not we would entertain striking that, or whether or not we would change it to have it go somewhere that's more appropriate, like the fire department or the building commissioner.
Should you leave the section of, keep us up to date on who the owner is?
Yeah,
Leave that in there.
You've already done that in the previous section,
Okay.
Yeah.
section 7.
I'm not sure, 11.1.3, planned or actual major system modifications, so if they renovate the place and they increase their capacity, I'm guessing they have to go through this whole process all over again for permitting, correct? Or if they,
Or at least through the building permit.
Yeah.
right, well, if
If they were
if they
exceeding.
have an empty storage space and they put another battery bank in there, obviously they need to have it electrically wired in, so they need electrical inspector to go in and whoever else,
Yeah.
right? So it would be covered under this through one way or another.
Yeah, they would only have to come to us if they were exceeding the scope of their special permit.
Okay.
So, if they were just adding a unit and it was not,
Right, if they got a
Excess.
5 megawatt and they initially built a 2.5, they didn't put the whole 5 in, they wouldn't necessarily need to come back here, right?
Yeah,
Something like
correct.
that, okay.
so what's the board's sentiment on that section 11?
I believe it makes sense to take it out.
Yeah, I would also be in favor of taking out, because these have historically created, lots of work for our administrative staff, where, even where there's been a violation, we haven't been able to enforce, because if, our way to enforce it would ultimately be through court, and the select board ultimately is not gonna fund us for that unless it's for something that's meaningful. We just don't roll that deep as a town. So yeah, I would be in favor of striking 11. What are your thoughts, Francois? I know that this is one that's.
I mean, I've always thought that
Yeah.
putting a, I still think that we need to have something in there. We've seen what has happened with the solar arrays.
One alternative could be to do it by request and within 60 days of the request. So the planning board would have to initiate a request in writing. The property owner would have 60 days, or the operator would have 60 days from that written request to furnish such a report. And if they fail to furnish a report, then you would consider what enforcement action should be taken.
How do we enforce from a practical matter?
Yeah.
Court is still the enforcement process, but at least that way you have the right to request a report. So it would go from an annual report to reporting requirements. And frankly, if you have a good operator, a good property owner in town, they'll furnish a report.
But they have typically not been, from an example perspective, in terms of the people who we have right now from the solar. And amongst the solar facilities, we even have one that has a battery energy storage system.
Yeah, and asset-backed trust 64392 has never responded to a message.
But that's one example.
We actually have 3 of those examples.
Jeez.
And they never report.
Yeah.
I had a suggestion for consideration on section 11. The town of Amherst requires the operator to provide annual training to the fire department. And if we substituted that requirement for what's listed here as the reporting requirements, the dialogue that happens during that training would provide the most useful information to the people that probably can
Is that
make the
something
best
that-
use of that information.
It's a great idea. The
That-
question is how enforceable is that?
That's a pretty elegant solution. I mean, the fire department they can just
It's paperwork.
harass you, yeah.
I mean, is it enforceable though? I mean, I'm just asking because from the perspective, are they gonna say, well, that's an onerous request, even from
And
the fire department?
if they don't comply with the annual training, can they shut them down for non-compliance with the fire code?
I think an element similar to that is in your special permit for the tower up here. Some kind of training of, maybe it was just,
It was one-time training.
Maybe it was one
Yeah.
time.
It's a one-time, yeah.
So if we apply the standard proposed as a bylaw itself, or a component of the bylaw, I would treat it similar to a condition of a special permit. You're allowed to apply conditions to a special permit so as to reasonably regulate the proposed use. So if we treat this one in the same, ongoing training is a reasonable condition, and one that would typically cost the municipality quite a bit to actually get done. So this is putting the onus back on the person who's reaping the benefit of the use code. So I think it's reasonably enforceable. I also will go so far as to say, I don't think it's a point of critical failure. I think you could design an annual training requirement, put it in, and if the Attorney General for some reason or another doesn't like it, they're just gonna strike that one section. They're not going to fail your entire bylaw. They'll strike just the lone component.
But on that same vein of thinking, and to also, I guess, to make sure I understand you, because maybe this is what you're suggesting, we just put in a special permit as a special permit requirement and not even worry about it in the bylaw. Because we can put special conditions in special permits,
true.
as long as they're not unreasonable.
Yes, but that does open the discussion for an applicant to challenge you in land court to say, well, why didn't you require it of this person over here or this person over here? Why are you now requiring it to me? Just because I'm the last one in the door doesn't mean that you can require it of me when you haven't required it 2 times over. If the fire department is trained up enough to do this on your, such and such on Pritchardville Road, why would I have to do it here on Old Westminster Road? By putting it in the bylaw and applying it as a universal standard.
Yeah.
You also don't have to do this 10 times over. Let's say you have 10 installations, you don't have to do 10 trainings. You can split the cost amongst the 10 operators and actually make it less burdensome over time, which only strengthens your argument for why this is a universal standard, not a condition.
Okay, so what's the consensus here? So that we can get close. This is literally the last thing that we have standing between us and having this be something that I think is votable tonight and passable at the meeting once Alec cleans it up.
I'm not sure about this, but one possible way in which getting the fire department involved would help with enforcement is that I don't think the owner or the operator is going to want their insurance company to know that they're not cooperating with a request from the local fire department.
Yeah.
not sure how the insurance company would find out, but if I was the owner, I wouldn't want that to happen.
That right there is a greater argument why something like this shouldn't be denied, because feasibly, the operator is going to get a break on their insurance because
Yeah.
they're helping provide updated training on an annual basis to the fire department.
So what if we just kinda split the middle here, and the report as it's stated in the proposed 11 becomes due to the fire department? Cause they're actually gonna have the skills to look at and evaluate what's going on.
They're not gonna get the annual report though.
Well, there would still be the penalty feature built in. And we do have some differences. We have a better functioning administrative, support team than we've ever had. Between having Leanne and Alec, granted that you can't plan for people and you have to plan for jobs themselves. But assuming the town continues going in a similar direction, we have administrative people who follow up on things. So, I guess so that still leaves the question open in terms of what we do with 11.
Just wanna go around board member to board member and ask training requirement or fire department report.
I like it.
I'm in favor.
Well,
Leaves me out of
So is that no preference?
Actually, I think it makes sense to keep it with the fire department and
Okay.
get rid of this, cause we've had no luck in all these years.
Yep.
They actually get a report, so to me, it's a better way to do it.
So to the fire department, not as training requirement?
Yes.
Erica?
I can see both sides, but I lean more to the fire department.
Peter?
Fire department,
Francois?
I
training.
agree.
Okay. So yeah, so we have the report be due to the fire department, and we call that a win. It's just an example in how difficult human communication is, where we can violently agreement on something for 25 minutes. And it takes us to figure that out. Thank you for,
Some good suggestions.
yeah.
Yeah, that was great.
Yeah, alright, so that is a full review of what we have proposed. Does anybody else have any general comments on it?
Just to confirm, did we address the comment under 6.7, depending on the location of the bus in relation to and its interaction with the electrical carriage? Mark, you would left a comment noting that you did not feel it was appropriate for the planning board.
Yeah, we struck it.
We did strike that one, okay.
Yeah,
Missed that
and
one on mine.
I kept my notes here on the, what is the official version, which now has my signature at the top, noting that it's the official version.
Can you scan me a copy of this? Well, next week,
Right,
not on
so
Friday.
because of the way we posted this, we're gonna go right into the next item without closing the public hearing.
Yep.
And we'll do subsequent votes after. So the next one that's in the public hearing is the ADU bylaw.
Are you continuing the public hearing regardless to the next version, or?
Yes, because I'll be providing you an updated draft, you will have to continue the public hearing at the end.
Continuance.
Yeah.
What I will note, and we often get the question, when we post public hearings in this format where multiple articles are being considered simultaneously, at any time, you can move to recommend an article, and at that time, we can strike it from your public hearing notice moving forward. So for example, if you move to recommend the ADU bylaw, but you wanna continue the hearing for battery energy storage systems, you would make the recommendation, and then you would continue the public hearing, and that bullet point would no longer appear on your agenda moving forward.
Alright. So, moving forward through the public hearing, and it sounds like we'll be continuing on this, we have the ADU portion of it. And the ADU portion, I believe, is much closer.
I'm not going far. You're stuck with me for the rest of the night.
Great.
Alright, so, Alec, can you take us through the versioning and where we're currently at with this?
Yeah, absolutely. So for members of the public present and as background, because the board has looked at this a couple times, in August of 2024, the state of Massachusetts passed another housing act. They've passed successively one housing act every year for, going back 4 years now, in an attempt to deregulate housing as a whole in Massachusetts. There are a lot of reasons for that, but most notably, the state, through its bipartisan legislature, has taken the stance that we are in the midst of a housing crisis. Part of the addressed components in August of 2024 included accessory dwelling units, or as we often know them, they're in-law suites, granny flats, that little apartment in the basement that you rent out for a couple $1,000 if you're really lucky. These have, in many communities, in my own experience, gone unregulated, and the state is attempting to find the middle ground by allowing them by right in any single-family residential district. However, they do acknowledge that municipalities can apply certain standards. Many municipalities have overreaching standards as they are today. Bylaws that attempt to regulate who can choose to reside in there. For example, some communities will say that only a relative or a caregiver can live in an accessory dwelling unit. In the case of the new state act, which has now turned into regulations approved by the state, and having gone through the formal regulating process, now dictate that you can't make such overreaching claims. Instead, you can simply regulate that only in your single-family residential districts are these allowed if you so choose. You're allowed to set a cap of no more than one accessory dwelling unit, and if you choose to go beyond one accessory dwelling unit, you're required to apply a special permit process. Found that one a little odd, but nonetheless. And additionally, the state has put forward a data collection component. The state has attempted to regulate these independently, so to promulgate these regulations, so there is some guidance that's given beyond just local zoning. But the bylaw that we have developed to date is meant to comply with that. So you'll see a much simplified version of Article 24 as it stands today. In fact, looking at Article 24 as it's proposed tonight, your public hearing version dated 4/17, it occupies a page once you take out the actual warrant article language. That being said, even from the version you have in your packet, I actually have changes that need to be made, because one of the bylaws for a different community that I sent in for Attorney General's review, in this case, the Attorney General has agreed to review bylaws in advance. They've already provided feedback on a different town that notes for me areas that your bylaw, as I proposed it, is going to be deficient. Notably, I'm recommending that each instance of a single-family dwelling, the single family be stricken and titled principal dwelling instead. What the effect of that is a principal dwelling is not necessarily a single family dwelling. While the requirement is that you have to allow these by right in any single family residential district, a district that allows single family homes, you have to now allow an ADU as well. If, let's say, you also allow a two-family home, or you have an existing two-family home, the owner of that two-family home can also choose to cite an accessory dwelling unit if they want, and that it becomes a protected accessory dwelling unit. And they can only do that once under your bylaw, because your bylaw only allows one accessory dwelling unit, does not give the option for a special permit. But that is a notable change in interpretation, where many assumed, myself included, that this was only going to apply to single-family homes. This applies to any dwelling unit type, multifamily, triple-decker, two-family, your standard single-family. The nuance, your bylaw only allows it one time. So you get to phone that favor in once, apply that one accessory dwelling unit, whether it's attached or detached. And in the case of Hubbardston bylaw, you do deviate slightly from the state guidance. The state defines an ADU protected being the lesser of 1/2 the gross floor area of the existing dwelling, or 900 square feet. Hubbardston's bylaw originally allowed up to 1,000 square feet, and as Francois and I bounced drafts back and forth, Francois did feel it was important to retain that, so you would still be able to do up to 1,000 square feet. So that's a little less restrictive than the state is, and yet that's allowable. In this case, you can be less restrictive, but you can't be more restrictive than the state guidance. Notably, the change that occurs here for the board, this would otherwise be allowed by a simple majority at town meeting, you'd only have to get 51% of the vote, or 50.1%. Because of that change in deviation from the state's definition, you will have to get your typical 2/3 majority. But I encourage you to explore this if you feel it's important for Hubbardston. I don't think this is necessarily a hard lift on town meeting floor, and I don't think it's going to fail at a 2/3 majority. I think you're doing a good job of complying with the state regulations while continuing to make this more accessible for Hubbardston residents.
Thank you. And just as a matter of background, we were one of the first communities to adopt a enabling bylaw for ADUs, and one of the more permissive ones. So, we were certainly moving in a direction in order to be more enabling. And that's evidenced by the fact that we went with a slightly larger size than the state allowed, which also makes sense based upon the average lot size that we have in town. Also for context, in terms of bylaws that have passed at recent town meetings, this is the most popular one we've passed in recent history. The vote was like 190 to 2, or something absolutely crazy like that. It was a very, very popular bylaw. So with that said, this is obviously way shorter. So how do we want to step through this?
So the changes I've made, additionally, I do have to go over another change. So let's start with the principal dwelling unit versus single-family dwelling unit. You'll see a citation in line 22, line 29, and line 33, where it lists a single-family dwelling. I would recommend we strike single-family and replace that with the word principal.
Anybody on the board have any objections to that?
Can I ask a very technical question here, because this is now, and I know we have an ADU bylaw already in existence. By changing from single family to principal dwelling, right? If there is an existing piece of property on which they already built an ADU, would the combined single family that existed there plus the ADU be a principal dwelling?
That would come down to the interpretation of your building commissioner. I am not qualified to make that determination.
You know where I'm
only
going with
because
this here.
I am not your zoning enforcement officer.
Okay.
To that end, I don't know, so let's go down the rabbit hole. If your building commissioner rules that there's already an ADU here, and the property owner challenges that decision, I don't know what land court would say in that challenge, because it hasn't been challenged yet. Similarly, if he were to find in favor, well, I guess in opposition, if he were to find in favor that an ADU plus a single-family home
Is a principal
constitutes a
dwelling.
principal dwelling, then under this bylaw, the property owner would have the right to construct at either 1,000 gross square feet or 1/2 of the combined square feet of those two.
Exactly. Okay, so right now that would imply therefore they would technically really have 2 ADUs, right? Without having to go
Well-
through a special permit.
No, if your building commissioner has ruled that the first ADU is a part of the
I
principal dwelling,
understand that.
then it is not an ADU.
Okay.
Yeah, from a practical matter, because we have anti-compounding rules built into our zoning, I don't think it will, well, I suppose there would be people who would potentially be grandfathered who would have 2 disconnected living spaces on the same property. But anything constructing since zoning began, it would be harder to have 2 disconnected buildings that are used for occupation. So, yeah, go ahead.
Just curious, a commercial property that also has an apartment above it, would that be considered a principal dwelling, because it's not a single family?
No, that would be considered a mixed-use property,
Mixed-use
in my
property.
opinion.
Okay, so it wouldn't be a principal.
In my opinion. It's not a legal opinion, but it's my opinion. accepting the replacement of principal?
Yeah, if that's what we need to do to not have it get bounced back from the Attorney General's office.
Sounds good.
Cause that's ultimately the issue.
No. Now, at one point in one of my drafts, I inserted here the language under 1.3, which is line 18. 1.3 reads, "The ADU may be attached or detached on the same lot as the principal dwelling unit or on an adjacent lot under common ownership." I did this to try and get ahead of some scenarios that might play out where someone owns a home that is a little too close to the property line, but it's not non-conforming because the lot next door is in common ownership. Effectively, they're one lot for permitting purposes. That being said, Francois did raise some questions about taxation and assessment that I'm not qualified to answer because I'm not an assessor. So instead, I would recommend we simply strike the line "or on an adjacent lot under common ownership," because right now the regulations lay silent on that. There's no need for your bylaw to try and get ahead or to address that. The goal of this exercise was to comply with the state regulations.
Correct.
Make it
And
easier.
that's in the version that's currently on the table.
Yes. So I would recommend striking
Take it
the
out.
lot, the phrase "or on an adjacent lot under common ownership."
Correct, and we also had the issue with regards to the interconnectivity of piping, which I think is a real big issue that would come up. Because you would have to be able to supply water as well as be able to take and extract sewer.
Right,
From
we don't
one
have city
property
water here,
to
so
the
it's
other
different
one.
with a leach field and,
Yeah.
well,
I think we had a comment.
Yeah, I'd like to offer a comment on that. I actually really loved this bonus feature, even though it doesn't pertain to the state law. Because it gets at the situation of if somebody has an adjoining lot that is non-conforming, it will not support a regular house. But this would allow you to put an ADU unit on it. You had exactly that situation. Dolores Ordway came to you with precisely that situation a couple of years ago, where she's got the land next to her principal dwelling. It's not conforming, I think, for frontage, something. I think it's a great way to raise density, housing density.
The problem though being that I think we're seeing some issues in terms of how do you interpret it from the tax perspective, and then separately, as I mentioned earlier, if you now have a separate lot and you have pipes that cross those two lots, because that is a requirement in this particular case, you now have other issues that need to be addressed. In Dolores's case, could she not have just simply joined the two lots and make it one lot?
See, how does that work with merger?
Well, it leaves you with one lot with one house. She was trying to
Just
have
file
two
a
houses.
plan with no boundary line.
She has two
Just a new
houses?
plan
She was trying
showing
to.
the entire perimeter.
Well, she was
no
trying to put
boundary
in
line,
an ADU on that second lot, right?
Well,
Plan.
she wanted a residence, a second residence.
Yeah, I think that's where we start getting into some real tricky areas, which I don't think we need to use this as, I mean, this is really truly for ADUs. And I think the Dolores case was that she would be able to build an additional residence on a lot, but but this is really only for ADUs. If she wanted to have this as an ADU, she would be able to combine the two lots and therefore have an ADU on that adjacent lot.
Yeah, because merger would be an option that would be available.
Exactly.
Correct.
Because you can
That
pretty
wouldn't-
much
that
always
wouldn't-
merge
Yeah, you're right,
everything
that wouldn't
or-
matter.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Whereas if she wants to build a separate residence there, that's just a very different
Yeah,
situation
okay.
altogether.
Building another
Yep,
residence.
yep, you convinced me.
Now, I will also note, so, the chair did ask me while we were discussing this, how does the merger doctrine apply? This language that's in here would attempt to start getting ahead of that, but the merger doctrine it doesn't have to be addressed through this. The option to formally merge your lots and create the space does still apply. And I will note that the Attorney General has said even in cases where a lot is non-conforming, you can still do an ADU on it, you just have to conform to the setback requirements that are within the bylaw, even if it's a non-conforming lot. And so, even if merging the lots doesn't cure the nonconformity, but it gives you enough room to actually establish an ADU
Yeah.
while meeting setback requirements, that remains an option to the property owner.
But the problem does exist that if you had two conforming lots and you decided to put the ADU on the other lot, now you have a
So-
totally separate issue.
So I'm gonna take one more comment on this, but
That's
then
it.
limit, because I think we're also back in that violent agreement.
I know, I just keep stretching the timeout, don't I?
Oh, no.
Curious, for the ADU, under this being where our utilities work in town, because we don't have any town water or sewer, if you had that merged lot, do you have to use the same septic and well, or can you drill a new well and have a new whole tight tank leach field or whatever it might be? It needs to tie in, so a distance, pitch, overland, I mean, you gotta be going downhill or something to get it to tie in properly for I'm just confused.
Yeah, it has to.
So, our job is not to tell the property owner how to do it.
Right.
But Title V does regulate how they can do it.
Okay.
We have to
And
get
so,
permits.
in the case, for example, with a septic system, Title
Mhm.
V says it either needs to be a two-chamber system by which the two chambers can collectively handle the different loads,
Right.
or it needs to be the two separate systems.
Okay.
Yeah, and it's the requirement to follow the, essentially the rules for that are in 2.5.
Correct.
Domestic water and wastewater disposal system shall be adequate to serve both the existing principal residence and the ADU.
So whatever's already there has
Yeah.
to be able to work.
Yep.
Yeah.
Or you need to install something else.
Okay.
Yeah, because they're, even if it's by right, it's still subject to a building permit. So if you don't comply with the sanitary code, you won't get the building permit.
Okay, thank you.
So-
So we're in agreement to strike the phrase "or on an adjacent lot" under common ownership.
Yes.
I see.
Yeah, can't forget about that one.
Okay.
Yep. What else do we have for changes?
Those were the only changes I came into tonight with. Otherwise, I feel confident your bylaw is prepared to go. I am still awaiting the Attorney General's feedback on your bylaw, but at this point, I'm expecting no comment or minor comments that could be addressed as a floor amendment.
Okay, so barring one more comment, we're ultimately just gonna continue this to the next meeting, so we hopefully have those comments back by then, same as we're doing with the other one.
Yes, now I will note as well, and maybe Mark's raising his hand for this exact reason, Mark has also alerted me to other sections of your bylaw that address accessory dwelling units, including, in my opinion, a little bit of an outdated definition. I haven't looked at it fully enough to say whether I think we need to go in and change it, but it's something I am looking at, so you might as well keep this one open at the same time. However, I'm confident that Article 24 can stand on its own. We now just need to determine if other sections of your bylaw are in conflict with the Attorney General's and the new regulations.
You're also gonna need to look at those Attorney General memos, because it sounds like some of these sections you're looking at might have been impacted by what was supposed to have been updated in 23 and 24. So, yep, go ahead.
I want you to think closely about 2.7, because I'm not as convinced that this is really ready to go. By right, siting of an ADU is allowed only within single-family residential zoning districts.
So,
That only is gonna be a red flag for AG scrutiny, and they're gonna start asking, what does this mean?
Isn't it allowed?
And I'm not sure what this means. Does that mean that ADUs are not allowed in our commercial and town center district?
No, both of those districts do allow single-family homes by right.
yeah, because.
We haven't defined what we mean by single-family residential zoning district.
That is great
All-
feedback. The state defines it for us in their regulations.
Do you need that section?
It's
there?
defined in, it's defined in the state's
Yeah.
regulations.
Yep.
We have, because our zoning is set up as pyramidal zoning, it gets pulled in that way. So the way I read this is if a single-family residence is allowed, and because each zoning level we have allows every lesser use, it gets carried forward because every zone is residential agriculture and then has the additional use.
Yeah.
So it applies to commercial and industrial.
We allow residential in every district in town.
Yes, we do.
So why is this here?
Would that also need to be changed to principal instead of single family like everything else says?
No,
Okay.
oddly
No,
enough,
this is
while the
different.
state refers to principal dwellings and the right to construct an ADU, they only protect an ADU in those districts that also allow single-family homes.
Okay.
The way that I've phrased this is intentional. You as a town may someday decide that you don't want to allow ADUs in a new district that you create, or that you don't want to allow single-family homes. So you have the right to then establish a district, and the state says clearly you have that right to do that. I would not recommend doing that at the same time, because I do think it would draw eyes, it would slow down your actual review period, but nonetheless, it's your right if you want to outlaw or prohibit single-family homes. Many communities already do that in certain districts, like an industrial district or a more dense commercial district.
Okay, I buy that too.
That makes sense.
Awesome. All right, so,
One-
final comment, then we're gonna definitely continue the hearing, because we have more business. Yep.
On the definition in section 1, as I read it, I wondered if sanitary facilities should read sanitary fixtures to make it more clear that we're not talking about the waste disposal system.
This is directly
This is
from,
sanitary.
this is directly from the state law, I would leave it right as it is.
What's that?
This is
Yeah.
lifted directly from the state law.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
Oh,
All
that's
right.
their problem.
So
Leave it to
with
the
that,
board.
we're gonna, I'd like to take a vote to continue the public hearing to our next meeting, which is scheduled
May 7th.
May 7th.
You need a motion?
Yes.
I'll make that motion.
Here in a first, we have a second. Any discussion? Calling a vote,
Holman's eye.
Jack, aye.
Are you right?
and the chair is aye. So that meeting is, the public hearing is continued. Thank you, everybody, for the work on that. It's always dicey going through these, and I'm happy that, looks like we're gonna be heading in with something that's gonna work through council and work through the meeting, so, thank you, everybody, for the work. I mean, I was just telling Bill, lately, planning board meetings have been like 35 minutes.
You lied.
I mean,
You-
I'm not
you
lying,
No,
jinxed-
it's
You jinxed
true.
it last
Yeah,
time
but-
because you
yeah,
said
but
this
this
was
is
so
the first one.
short.
Like, we haven't had a meeting over 30 minutes for,
2 months.
yeah, 2 or 3 months.
Wow.
Yeah.
If it
credits-
helps, you're still doing better than the board that I primarily support in
Fair
another
enough.
community.
I mean, credit to Alec, because he's helped us become much more efficient. All right, so let's move forward on the agenda. We have, under new business, and we are gonna have some meaty things that come up under matters not reasonably anticipated by chair. So moving into new business, we have, from the Open Space Committee, the Open Space and Recreation Plan Update Presentation.
Well, I'm not really gonna present the plan, so don't worry about that.
I didn't print it. It's fine.
I have read it in excruciating detail multiple times.
So, just to recap history, to recap the purpose of the open space plan, the state Division of Conservation Services oversees these things, and they're also the people with the money for grant programs for land protection and for recreational facilities at Curtis Field and things like that. And they require you to have an approved open space and recreational plan to apply for those kind of grants. So that's why we do this every 7 years. So last year, the 95% draft went out to all the town boards and to MRPC for review. We got back review from, there are 3 entities that are absolutely you're required to document in the plan that, yes, this board received a copy for review and had an opportunity to comment on it. We need the select board, we need MRPC, and we need the planning board to have reviewed our plan. We've received comments back from select board and MRPC. Planning board is last man standing. Where we're at on it is the plan is basically finalized and ready, and the most substantive comments came from the Division of Conservation Services, saying, you need to add this, that other thing. All those changes have been made, that's where we're at, we're ready to go final. this is your opportunity to offer any comments you may have on it.
So, for additional background on that, I was also sent as the planning board's representative to some of the review and discussion sections. So I've, on behalf of the board, I've had the opportunity to comment pretty extensively, but that's not the same as the planning board's formal comment, but I wanted to add that to the discussion. So I have had lots of comments on this and since delivered them. And they all got disregarded, no, I'm just kidding.
Only some.
Most of them made it in. But credit to the Open Space Committee on this, because this is a pretty meaty document with some fairly intensive mapping and data processing in it related to percentage of space open for development and things along those lines. And I know Open Space actually went in and manually recalculated the numbers, so they didn't just take what came from MRPC. But there were differences in some of those numbers. But that the quality of work product on this is on par, if not better than what's been coming out of the regional planning organizations lately. So I have a lot of faith in the work that went into this. In terms of the board's opportunity to comment, because it is a monstrous document and we need to have final formal comments on record, what do you need from a compliance standpoint? Do you need us to take a vote on it? Like next week and
Well,
say,
this is, you are not approving it, you're not even accepting it. Those functions are Division of Conservation Services, accepts and approves the plan.
You could seek a motion to authorize Leanne or I or a member of the board to issue a letter of endorsement.
I like it. When do you need it by?
Sooner than later, there's no deadline.
So, and what I'm gonna propose here is that we do it in a motion where we give the authority to ALEC, but we tell ALEC to not do it for a week in case there's any final comments that need to go in. I mean, I've already propped this horse up against the wall and beat it as many times as possible, so I'm gonna look at it again, but I would be surprised if I had comments. And if I had comments, it's probably just places where we disagree, and that's life sometimes. That's probably the fairest way to take it from a board perspective. Does everybody think that makes sense?
Yeah.
So would somebody like to make a motion to authorize
I'll make that motion.
ALEC to send a letter on behalf of the board, after waiting a 1-week comment period? So, we have a first, do we have a second?
Yes, second.
Any further discussion?
Nope.
All right, call the vote.
Holman's aye.
Jack, aye.
Are you right?
The chair is aye.
I will put it on my calendar for Friday morning.
Excellent. Yeah, and it's,
Glenn's signature himself.
yeah, and it's worth keeping a copy of this because
Yep.
to the earlier point, there are places where, in the master plan, where the calculation in this is correct. Whereas in the master plan, it may not be. And in some of those places, it's pretty meaningful. Although, the last time, Tracy took a pass through it, she adjusted the calculations to be in line with what was in here. But there's still places.
Yeah,
where-
in any other state, this type of plan would be called a master plan.
Yeah. It really would.
Out of curiosity, did you have to do new self-evaluation and transition plans, or did you have a valid ADA plan to reference back to?
It's, the self-evaluation is specific to recreational facility, it's not statewide, townwide. And we had done it in the last version, and that's still the version that's in there right now. However, when the new one comes out later this year, we'll stick that on as an appendix.
Yep.
Alright, so thank you for stopping by for this and for all the other stuff.
Thank you much.
Thank you for all the work on it.
Thank you, Joe.
Alright, so moving forward into matters not reasonably anticipated by chair, we had a request come through from the town administrator that, well, Alec, can you actually walk us through this a little bit so I don't misquote it?
Yep, so Nate is getting ready with his team to put the final draft of the warrant in front of the select board, get it so that they can sign off and endorse it. Once the select board signs off on the warrant, any changes made after the fact must be made as floor amendments because their signature is binding on it. And so to that extent, there is one warrant article in particular that we do need some additional feedback before we can go into it. That's specifically your floodplain district. As this board will remember from our discussion at your last meeting and the meeting before, there is an ongoing effort by FEMA to update flood maps. Along with that, the state has been moving towards the model floodplain bylaw. So if you are an affected community, which Hubbardston is, then you must adopt a revised bylaw in many cases by July 8th, 2025. I believe that's the effective map date, and therefore the date that you have to have your bylaws updated. There's two approaches that can be taken. Leanne has been taking a very strong pass at it with a representative from DCR, who is our expert, so to speak, on the region, bouncing back revisions to ensure that it would comply today. Additionally, other communities have just gone to adopt outright the model bylaw as the state has put forward. I'll note the model bylaw isn't just the state's take at it. They worked with FEMA and the National Flood Insurance Provider to develop that. But regardless, the revisions that Leanne has put forward would also comply with that effort. And so the indication that we need from you tonight, I think there are some specific questions you have, but otherwise is whether you want to retain the Hubbardston bylaw as much as possible, the effort taken already, if you prefer to go to the model bylaw, and then answering those direct questions that Leanne has. I will note this bylaw typically sells itself, only because failure to stay compliant with floodplain regulations means that people will either lose access to the federally provided flood insurance, which is the best rate you can get presumably, or they will have to go the private route, which is significantly more expensive.
What is your suggestion on tackling this one? And this is not as a public hearing, obviously, because it is advertised for
Yes.
our next meeting as a public hearing.
Yes, this is a working session so that we can prepare a draft warrant article to the standard necessary for you to have a public hearing. Personally, I don't have a recommendation, model bylaw or not. I think Leanne has already put in a lot of work in the bylaw you have in front of you. So unless you feel that bylaw is, unless you feel that you can't quite understand it, or that the public wouldn't be able to understand it, I think stick with what you have in front of you and just answer the most direct questions we have, because that will get you to a point of compliance. If for any reason you think it would fail on the floor, then we could go the route of the model bylaw, but admittedly, the model bylaw has just as much technical jargon in it. It's maybe just formatted a very specific way that they give you.
I mean,
So my questions are basically on the comments that are included in the bylaw that I put in front of you guys. So in 13.2, number 3, the floodplain district also includes all that land along any named or unnamed water body or water course for a horizontal distance of 50 feet from the permanent or seasonal banks thereof, except as otherwise defined on the flood insurance rate map. The DCR rep asked if this was being enforced. It's a higher standard than can be kept as additional bylaws from the model bylaw, so we don't need it, and I have no idea if it's being enforced. So I wanted to put it in front of you whether you wanted to keep it and or strike it.
What section was that?
13.2, number 3.
So So Alec, what's the practical implications of either keeping or leaving? Because I think one of the places where we sometimes run into challenge is with working with some of the more Boston-based policymakers, is they don't necessarily understand.
Rural.
Yeah, they don't understand the lot sizes, they don't understand that, the entire town is forested, that 43% of it is already owned by the state.
So let me ask you this question. What is your permit type to enforce this? Do you require that someone who wants to vary from what would typically be allowed, which is very little in the floodplain, in the floodplain itself, do you require them to come before you locally? This would be things like, say, a small fence. Not big enough to trigger a full structure in a building permit, but it's still in the floodplain district.
I have never had an application or a reference to the floodplain come up since I've been on the planning board.
I've never dealt with it.
So then otherwise, the two entities that it defers to are the Conservation Commission has certain requirements under the Wetlands Protection Act, and your building commission. If there's any additional items that need to be permitted, and it is not explicitly called out as a permitted, then your building commissioner has the authority to generate a non-standard permit type by which the commissioner can then fail it, and they can go appeal that. They appeal it directly to the state determines whether or not it's a reasonable modification, they send back the data to the commissioner, and the commissioner issues a letter, a report stating why it was approved or disapproved by the state's appeals board. What I will note here, and from what you just described, your DCR rep has noted this is more restrictive than the law would otherwise be. So what you're doing is regulating beyond just the floodplain itself. Now, there's merits to that. In some cases, you might be trying to get ahead of the future. Generally speaking, it's accepted nowadays that, at least in the state of Massachusetts, that the floodplain's growing. High weather events are getting worse and worse. Damage to property and persons is getting more and more common. And so if you want to get ahead of that by regulating beyond just the typical boundary, you're setting the stage so that fewer damage will be reported in future years. You're more ahead of the game. But you don't have to regulate to the standard. This is a rare case where you are allowed to be more restrictive than the model bylaw, but you do not have to be.
What are some of the board's thoughts here from a policy standpoint?
Which will be first.
Yeah, cause the challenge, so like when I look here and it's like the following uses are prohibited in the floodplain district, most of these are already prohibited up to 150 feet, aren't they? So
By state law.
within a body of water, you're already not allowed to erect a new building or structures or fill or dredge or install a septic field within 150 feet.
What is it?
Or I actually think it's 300 feet now.
It's 150 feet, I believe. Gotta have 100 feet between well and septic. But this being a floodplain, you normally wouldn't have water here. According to our building code, but if it's under the floodplain, you could have water there. Do our regulations generate that information? Or anything else?
So much of this is how did I scroll so far past it? So, a fair portion of this is already in the zoning bylaw. So, Alec, what, I guess what ultimately is your recommendation here? Because the challenge I think we're having is that we ultimately, weren't really ready to take this on for tonight. But understanding that we have the timeline challenge that we have of a,
So if the board's not ready to render a decision on this tonight, you should leave it in this tonight. You should leave it as it is tonight. That way, we can prepare the warrant article as it is. It is easier to strike something that is more restrictive on the floor of town meeting than it is to insert something on the floor of town meeting. If you go to town meeting floor and say, I'm going to strike something that's more restrictive, you'll be applauded for it. If you go to town meeting floor and attempt to explain why you are applying a more restrictive standard, there will be several questions that follow it.
it's a pretty good point.
So strategically speaking, leave it in for tonight, we'll draft your warrant article with it still in place, and then if you choose to remove it, you'll get kudos on the floor.
I think that makes the most sense, given that we have to put this forward for compliance reasons. That's probably the best approach.
No,
Because
but
I only had a little bit of time to look at this ahead of the meeting because I
Tonight,
just wasn't on track with it.
Notably too, if the select board and presumably the finance committee are gonna look at it in the meantime, if any of them have questions or concerns, they might come to your public hearing, they might raise them there, might get a little bit more feedback that way.
Alright, so,
There are two positions we have to designate before we can proceed. One of them is the floodplain administrator. I, spoke to conservation chair regarding this. He declined the position, so by default, it's going to be accepted by, our building commissioner. You don't have to do anything. I'm telling you, he accepted, it's fine. The other position that we have to fill is in section number 8 under section 13.3. Water course alterations or relocations in a ravine area. In a ravine situation, the blank appropriate official in the community shall notify the following of any alteration or relocation of a water course. I do not know who to put for that, but we do have to fill it by model floodplain standards. It needs to be in there.
what's your recommendation?
Your building commissioner's already gonna be the administrator, so you might as well have them do the same.
Yeah, if conservation won't do it.
If you had a conservation agent, I would say that in particular is most appropriate for an agent, but where I don't believe you have a conservation agent on staff.
We do not.
they're all volunteers.
Yeah.
I will speak to him about that on Tuesday.
Okay.
Thank you, that was all. So as is, we'll leave it and we can strike it.
If it helps, he doesn't actually have to generate the data to
No.
prove this. It's gonna come probably from the Conservation Commission when they get an application or the materials that show something's changed. He's then just forwarding it along.
So, do we need a vote on that? So, we're just gonna move on to business?
Do you feel like you have enough information? You're good to go.
Okay. So, no vote necessary on that. The next one and the memo is in the board, it'd be rather older, and have previously talked about this. It's scheduled for a public hearing at our next meeting, but, the select board would like us to advance it before then, subject to floor amendments, which Pam has been due. Is the site plan approval regulations. And, as we've discussed, this has been something that has been, flagged for needing update for a very long time. And Alec had put together these recommendations at our request. So the suggestion here is that we do, essentially the same process. Correct.
Schedule a public hearing.
I thought we already had a public hearing scheduled
It
on this
is.
one.
You do, yes,
Yeah.
you already have a public hearing scheduled. So in my opinion, so let me back it up. What I've provided you with is a draft of rules and regulations for site plan approval specifically. This is different from administrative rules of the board. This is a standard rules and regulations document for this specific application type. What that effectively does is it strips the administrative components out of your zoning bylaw, the stuff that no one likes to vote on town meeting floor because it's the minutia of town meeting zoning articles. And it gives you the greater flexibility to be able to respond. So for example, 20 years ago, we accepted paper copies in great volume for everything we received. Nowadays, usually 2 to 3 paper copies and a flash drive with everything on it are acceptable. That's just one sample there. Additionally, too, by drafting rules and regulations, you have the better ability to respond to changing case law. So, in a past example, in a community I've worked with, there was a conflict. It said one instance in the bylaw that you had to appeal a site plan approval decision to the zoning board of appeals. The site plan rules and regulations said you had to appeal it right up to the land court. That right there is a point of contention in your own case, or in your own laws, and creates an arguing point for your opponent to make on the floor should you choose to deny something. By doing this, you're prepping your bylaw, taking out the minutia, the administrative, and giving yourself better ability to respond to applications in front of you. You are not, however, changing use types. Use types is still something that is regulated separately. Those are through your standard use regulations, section 4, as well as special permit criteria in cases where special permit is needed. We had previously discussed doing your special permit criteria simultaneously, but for the sake of safe passage at town meeting floor, I think it makes sense to do this independently first, so that you can set the stage to better deal with it later on.
And also, as a matter of background on this is an updated version that reflects, we had talked about this 2 or 3 meetings ago, and this is the version that incorporates the board feedback. So we're looking to send this to the select board the same way we did as the other version, with our comments from the last time we discussed it, marked up and incorporated into it. So from there, we would either be, we're gonna hold this for public hearing at our next meeting anyways, but we'd be making amendments to it on the floor. So, does anybody have any objection to going along with that as a process on it?
No objections.
And what I'll note, if I could, Mr. Chair, the more important part here, in rare case, it's not actually what you're bringing to town meeting floor in the form of an article, it's what you're bringing in the form of draft rules and regulations. Because the commitment you're making to town meeting floor is that once they approve this article, at the very next planning board meeting, you will adopt these rules and regulations. And so having a transparent and finished draft of the rules and regulations, which we can keep working on for the next couple meetings until town meeting, that's the most important part.
Yep. Yeah, because if anything, all this does is delete out a whole bunch of sections that say, the planning board may periodically adopt or amend rules and regulations for the implementation of this section 9, that majority vote of the board, so, yeah. Other than the omissions, we're not making a lot of substantive changes there. Right, so, nobody objects to that, so we'll be moving on in the same process. Are there any other items under matters not reasonably Chair.
Yeah, I received a proposal today from Patricia, the executive assistant, for purchase of a plotter, splitting the costs between, Board of Health, Concom, and Planning Board. I'm giving it to you tonight just because, Board of Health is going to bring it to their meeting next week, and so I wanted you to have it ahead of time.
How does the planning board get benefit or utilization of this?
Because we receive a lot of plans that are not digital, that we need to digitize, for purposes of distribution to the board.
So you
So
mean
you're
like
talking
the,
a large format scanner,
Correct.
not a plotter.
Or, yes,
Yeah, and the one
She
that,
referred.
that Bill had donated to us has stopped working.
correct.
Okay.
And I included the specific model in the paperwork I gave you along with the proposal.
gotcha,
What's the amount that, or our portion of the amount?
like 800 something?
Bill Murray donated you a plotter and scan?
Yeah, but it lasted for a month.
Oh.
$881.67
That's a donation.
per department.
Yeah, but it clearly was at pretty much the end of its life.
Yeah.
I guess it was worn out.
It was a,
Yeah, it was a tire old horse.
Places must have gotten a new one.
So we don't actually need a vote on this at this point?
Not tonight, I'm just bringing it to your attention, next meeting we should.
Okay. And, also by the next meeting, we'll need to have an accounting of what's in our revolving fund. So,
Yep, I,
we should have funding for this, but we need to make sure we have that account chart available. Okay. Anything else under matters not reasonably anticipated by chair? Any additional public comments or comments on anything from the board?
Oh, yeah.
Do it. Although, we do need to sort out alternative seats and stuff for MRPC, because I think as far as MRPC is concerned, our alternate is still Mark.
That's scary.
Yeah, the select board still hasn't reappointed somebody to fill that spot, so you're technically on the commission.
Good to know.
It's true.
Yeah. So if there's no other public comments, that moves us on to the best item, item 10. Somebody like to
I'll make that motion.
Here in, first, do we have a second?
I'll second.
Non-debatable, calling the vote.
Woman's eye.
Dak eye.
Steiger, aye?
The chair is aye. We are adjourned at 8:53.